Money loves a powerful mind. Become what you repeatedly think. Published by Limitless Growth Audiobook. Introduction. Most people do not suddenly become disciplined, confident, focused, or resilient. They become those things through ordinary choices repeated so often that the choices eventually feel natural. The same is true in the opposite direction. A person rarely loses focus in one dramatic moment. It happens through hundreds of small decisions to check the phone, postpone the task, avoid discomfort, or choose what feels easier. A person rarely loses confidence overnight. It can happen through repeatedly breaking promises to themselves, interpreting mistakes as personal failures, or allowing other people's opinions to become their inner voice. This is why your repeated thoughts deserve your attention. Money loves. A powerful mind is not about investing, trading, making money quickly, or following financial strategies. It is about the psychological foundation underneath meaningful personal growth, how you think, what you believe, what you repeatedly practice, and who those repetitions gradually turn you into. A powerful mind is not a mind that stays positive all day. Real life does not work that way. You will still have difficult mornings. You will still doubt yourself. You will lose focus. You will make mistakes. Some days you will not feel motivated at all. The difference is what you do next. This audiobook will challenge you to notice your automatic thoughts, question the beliefs behind them, strengthen your identity through action, protect your attention, manage emotional reactions, build discipline, and develop habits that remain useful when motivation fades. Do not listen passively. When you recognize a thought pattern, write it down. When you discover a habit that weakens you, interrupt it. When a chapter gives you an exercise, actually perform it. When you make a commitment, keep it small enough to keep and meaningful enough to matter. You are not trying to become a completely different person overnight. You are building evidence, one decision at a time. Every time you choose focus instead of distraction, patience instead of impulse, responsibility instead of excuses, or action instead of avoidance, you cast another vote for the person you are becoming. Your future identity is being rehearsed right now. So begin with one decision. Notice your thoughts. Question your patterns. Choose your response. Take the next useful action. Then repeat. Because what you repeatedly think influences what you repeatedly do, and what you repeatedly do eventually becomes part of who you are. Chapter 1. Expose the hidden thoughts running your life. Before you can change the direction of your life, you have to become aware of what is quietly directing it. This sounds simple, but it is one of the most difficult forms of personal growth because your mind does not announce every thought it produces. Many thoughts arrive so quickly and so regularly that they feel less like thoughts and more like facts. Consider an ordinary morning. You wake up and remember something you have been avoiding. Before you even leave your bed, a sentence appears. I will deal with it later. You check your phone. A few minutes become 20. Then another thought arrives. I have already wasted the morning, so there is no point starting now. Nothing dramatic happened. Yet two small thoughts influenced two small choices, and those choices moved your day in a particular direction. This is how many patterns work. They do not usually enter your life wearing a warning sign. They hide inside ordinary moments. You might think, I am just tired. Sometimes you are. But perhaps that sentence has also become a convenient exit whenever something requires effort. You might say, I am not confident enough. Maybe confidence is genuinely low. But repeating that sentence can also become a reason to avoid the very situations that would help confidence grow. You might tell yourself, I always lose focus. Eventually, you may stop expecting yourself to concentrate. The important point is not to judge these thoughts, it is to investigate them. Your first task is not to become positive. Your first task is to become observant. Think of your mind as a room where conversations have been happening for years. You may have heard the voices so often that you stopped noticing them. Chapter 1 begins by turning on the light. For the next several days, pay attention to what your mind says immediately before you act. Do not only observe thoughts during major decisions. Watch the small moments. What do you tell yourself before starting difficult work? What do you think when someone criticizes you? What happens internally when you see another person's progress? What sentence appears when you make a mistake? What do you say to yourself when you feel bored, tired, rejected, or uncertain? These moments contain useful information. A thought becomes especially important when it repeatedly appears before the same behavior. Suppose you repeatedly think, "I need to feel motivated first," and then postpone important work. The thought may be functioning as a permission slip for avoidance. Suppose you think, "If I cannot do it perfectly, I should wait," and repeatedly delay starting. Now, perfectionism is not merely an idea, it has become a behavioral trigger. This is why the goal is to find the connection between thought and action. Use a simple four-part observation: thought, situation, behavior, result. Write down the thought that appeared. Record what was happening when it appeared. Identify what you did next. Then notice what that choice produced. For example, "I will start tomorrow." Situation: an important task feels uncomfortable. Behavior: you postpone it. Result: temporary relief followed by greater pressure. Do this without insulting yourself. You are collecting evidence, not building a case against yourself. You may discover that some of your strongest limitations are not dramatic beliefs. They are tiny, repeated assumptions. "I need more time. I work better under pressure. This is just how I am. I will begin when things calm down. Other people are naturally better at this." Some of these statements may contain a small amount of truth. That is what makes them powerful. A believable excuse is more dangerous than an obviously ridiculous one. The purpose of awareness is not to eliminate every negative thought. That would be unrealistic. Minds produce fear, doubt, frustration, and uncertainty. Mental strength begins when you stop treating every thought as an instruction. A thought can appear without becoming a decision. You can think, "I do not feel like exercising," and still exercise. You can think, "This is difficult," and continue. You can think, "I might fail," and still take the next step. That small space between thought and action is where personal freedom begins. So today, do not attempt to rebuild your entire personality. Choose one recurring pattern. Watch for it. Notice when it appears. Identify what it usually makes you do. Then pause before following it. Ask yourself 3 questions. What am I thinking right now? What is this thought encouraging me to do? Do I actually want to follow that instruction? You may not change the pattern immediately. That is fine. The first victory is noticing it. Awareness comes before control. Once you can see the hidden script, you can finally question the words it has been teaching you to repeat. And that leads to the next step: discovering which stories your mind has mistaken for permanent truth. Chapter 2. Rewrite the mental stories that keep you small. Once you begin noticing your thoughts, something interesting happens. You realize that many of the sentences running through your mind are not fresh observations about the present. They are old interpretations being replayed. A difficult experience happened months or years ago, but your mind may still be using the meaning you attach to it as a guide for what you expect today. That is where a deeper form of personal growth begins. A thought can be temporary. A story can become a structure. Imagine someone who gives an answer in a meeting, receives criticism, and feels embarrassed. The event itself is simple. One idea was criticized. But the mind may add a larger story. "I am not intelligent enough." If that story is repeated, the person may stop speaking up. Later, they may describe themselves as quiet or lacking confidence. Eventually, the original incident is almost forgotten, while the identity created around it remains. This is how the mind can turn an event into a definition. The goal is not to pretend that difficult experiences did not happen. You are not required to erase disappointment, rejection, failure, or criticism. The goal is to examine the meaning you gave those experiences and ask whether that meaning still deserves authority over your behavior. Start with one belief that regularly limits you. Maybe it sounds like, I am not disciplined. Perhaps it is, I always give up. Maybe you believe, I am terrible at speaking, I cannot concentrate, or I am just not the kind of person who follows through. Now slow the belief down. Instead of saying, this is who I am, ask, what experiences taught me to think this way? That question changes the conversation. You may remember several moments that seem to support the belief. Perhaps you have postponed important tasks many times. Perhaps you have abandoned several habits. Perhaps you have avoided difficult conversations. But evidence of a repeated behavior is not necessarily evidence of a permanent identity. There is an enormous difference between saying, I have behaved inconsistently, and saying, I am an inconsistent person. The first describes a pattern, the second turns the pattern into a prison. This distinction matters because identity-based beliefs influence future choices. If you believe you are incapable of discipline, a difficult day can become proof that you were right. If you believe you are learning discipline, the same difficult day becomes an opportunity to practice. The facts may be identical. The interpretation changes the response. This is why you should not replace every negative thought with an exaggerated positive statement. Telling yourself, I am the most disciplined person alive, when your current behavior contradicts, it may feel artificial. A stronger approach is to create a belief that is realistic and actionable. Instead of saying, I never procrastinate, try, I can become more consistent by starting before I feel ready. Instead of, I am fearless, try, I can act while feeling uncertain. Instead of, I never fail, try, I can learn from mistakes without turning them into my identity. These statements do not deny reality. They give you room to influence it. Use the belief rewrite method. First, identify the old belief. Second, find the experiences that appear to support it. Third, look for evidence the belief ignores. Fourth, create a more accurate interpretation. Fifth, prove that interpretation through one small action. That final step is critical. A new belief becomes stronger when your behavior begins producing evidence for it. Suppose your old story is, I cannot stay consistent. Do not spend an hour repeating, I am consistent. Instead, choose one small commitment and keep it for 7 days. Read 5 pages, walk for 15 minutes, write for 10 minutes, practice a skill for 20 minutes. The activity itself matters less than the evidence you create. Each completed commitment sends a message to your mind. My behavior can be different. That message is more convincing because you lived it. Be careful, however, not to turn this process into another reason to attack yourself. If you break a commitment on day 4, do not conclude that the old identity has won. Examine what happened. Was the commitment unrealistic? Did your environment interfere? Did you forget? Did you encounter an emotional trigger? Adjust the system and continue. Changing a mental story is rarely a single dramatic decision. It is a negotiation between the old interpretation and new evidence. The old story may return. Let it. When it appears, recognize it. That is the interpretation I have practiced. Then ask, is there another way to understand this moment? That question creates psychological space. And with that space comes responsibility. You are no longer forced to live according to every conclusion your past produced. You can respect what happened without allowing it to dictate what happens next. Now there is another question waiting for you. If the old story does not have to define you, then what should? What kind of person are you deliberately building through your choices? That question takes us beyond beliefs and into identity. Chapter 3. Build an identity that can carry your ambitions. Once you begin questioning the stories that have shaped your thinking, another question appears naturally. If the old story does not have to define you, then what will? This is where identity becomes important. Most people think of identity as a description. I am shy. I am disciplined. I am bad with pressure. I am a procrastinator. But identity is more than a label. It is a prediction your mind makes about how you are likely to behave. If you repeatedly tell yourself that you are someone who always gives up, difficulty will feel like confirmation. If you begin seeing yourself as someone who finishes what they start, difficulty becomes a situation in which you have an opportunity to prove that identity. This does not mean pretending to be someone you are not. It means deliberately practicing qualities you want to make part of who you are. Imagine two people facing the same difficult task. One thinks, I hope I can stay disciplined today. The other thinks, I am practicing being a person who keeps commitments. The first person is waiting for a feeling. The second is looking for an action that confirms an identity. That difference matters. Your identity becomes stronger when your behavior repeatedly agrees with it. So instead of asking only, what do I want to achieve? Begin asking, what kind of person would naturally behave in a way that supports this? If you want greater focus, practice being someone who protects attention. If you want discipline, practice being someone who follows through. If you want emotional strength, practice being someone who pauses before reacting. If you want confidence, practice being someone who takes action despite uncertainty. The goal is not to build a perfect identity. It is to build a dependable one. Start with 3 qualities you genuinely want to develop. Choose qualities such as patience, courage, consistency, focus, honesty, resilience, or self-control. Then turn each quality into a behavior. Do not write, I want to be more disciplined. Write, when I decide that something matters, I will complete the first 20 minutes before checking entertainment. Do not write, I want to be confident. Write, when I have something useful to say, I will speak instead of automatically remaining silent because I fear judgment. Identity becomes practical when it can be observed. This creates an important rule. Never rely entirely on a label. Create evidence. You can call yourself disciplined all day, but your actions are what eventually convince your own mind. Every time you keep a commitment, you add evidence. Every time you face something uncomfortable instead of immediately escaping, you add evidence. Every time you recover after a mistake instead of abandoning yourself, you add evidence. Think of this evidence as bricks. One brick is insignificant. Hundreds of bricks can become a structure. The same process works in the opposite direction. Every time you repeatedly act against the identity you want, you strengthen another pattern. That is why small decisions matter. They may feel unimportant in isolation, but repetition gives them weight. You will also have days when you fail to behave according to your chosen identity. Expect that. Becoming disciplined does not mean never being inconsistent. Becoming resilient does not mean never becoming discouraged. Becoming focused does not mean never getting distracted. The important question is what happens after the mistake. Instead of saying, I knew I wasn't disciplined, say, that choice did not match the person I am practicing becoming. What needs to change before the next decision? That response protects identity while demanding responsibility. Now put this into action. Choose 3 qualities. Write 1 behavior that proves each quality. Keep the behaviors small enough to perform consistently, then practice them for the next 7 days. At the end of each day, ask, did my actions today support the person I am becoming? Do not search for perfection, search for evidence. Because identity is not built through imagination alone, it is built through repeated proof. And once you begin proving that you can act differently, you will encounter the next challenge. Knowing what to do is one thing, but doing it when comfort is calling you in the opposite direction requires another skill. You must learn to choose what matters later over what feels easier now. Chapter 4. Train yourself to choose what matters over what feels easy. You have now begun to see your thoughts more clearly, question the stories behind them, and build an identity through deliberate action. But there is a difficult reality waiting at the center of every meaningful change. Knowing what matters does not automatically make you want to do it. There will be mornings when you know you should exercise, but staying in bed feels better. There will be afternoons when an important task is waiting, but your phone seems far more interesting. There will be evenings when you plan to read, practice, or prepare for tomorrow, yet entertainment offers an effortless escape. This is not a character flaw, it is part of being human. Your mind naturally notices immediate rewards. Comfort is available now. Effort asks something from you now. The benefit of discipline may not appear until later. That creates a quiet conflict. The present wants relief, while the future wants preparation. Learning to handle that conflict is one of the foundations of mental strength. Think about a person who decides to develop a consistent reading habit. On the first evening, reading for 30 minutes may feel easy. On the 4th evening, they are tired. On the 7th, they receive an invitation to watch something entertaining. Nothing dramatic is happening. There is no crisis. Yet this ordinary moment contains a powerful decision. They can choose what feels best immediately, or they can choose what supports the person they are trying to become. The important point is not that entertainment is bad. Rest, enjoyment, and recreation are necessary. The problem begins when immediate comfort repeatedly overrides meaningful priorities. If every uncomfortable moment is answered with escape, your ability to tolerate discomfort becomes weaker. If you occasionally stay with the difficult thing, you begin teaching your mind something different. Discomfort does not control me. This is why discipline is not simply about forcing yourself to work harder. It is about developing the ability to remain aligned with your priorities when your emotional state is asking for something else. Start small. Choose one daily situation where you usually reach for immediate comfort. Perhaps you check your phone when work becomes difficult. Perhaps you stop exercising when the routine becomes boring. Perhaps you delay an important conversation because avoiding it feels easier. Do not try to eliminate every comfort from your life. Instead, practice deliberate delay. Use the delayed reward drill. Choose one small reward you normally take immediately, then connect it to an important action. Finish 20 minutes of focused work before entertainment. Complete your planned exercise before scrolling. Organize tomorrow before relaxing for the evening. Read a few pages before watching something. The reward is not forbidden. It is simply moved behind the responsibility. This teaches your mind a valuable sequence. Responsibility first, reward second. Over time, this changes the question you ask yourself. Instead of, what do I feel like doing? You begin asking, what choice supports what I said matters? That is a much stronger question. You can make this even more practical by creating a discomfort reps practice. Once each day, deliberately do something mildly uncomfortable but useful. Take the stairs instead of the elevator. Finish the last few minutes of a workout. Start the task you have been avoiding. Sit quietly without reaching for your phone. Have the respectful conversation you have been postponing. The objective is not suffering. The objective is training. A person becomes more comfortable with discomfort by experiencing it safely and discovering again and again that discomfort rises, remains for a while, and eventually changes. This also protects you from a common mistake, waiting to feel ready. If you only act when you feel motivated, your behavior will constantly follow your mood. Some days will be productive, other days will disappear. Instead, create a simple rule. I do not need to feel like doing it. I only need to begin. Beginning is often the hardest part. Once movement starts, resistance frequently becomes smaller. But be realistic. There will be days when you genuinely need rest. Discipline does not mean ignoring exhaustion, responsibilities, or legitimate limits. The goal is not to become someone who says yes to every demand. The goal is to become someone who can distinguish between real need for recovery and convenient desire for escape. That distinction requires honesty. At the end of each day, ask yourself, where did I choose comfort over what mattered? Then ask, where did I choose what mattered even though comfort was available? Do not use these questions to shame yourself. Use them to collect evidence. Every time you delay an unnecessary reward and complete something meaningful, you strengthen the identity you began building in the previous chapter. But there is another layer. Doing this once proves little. Doing it repeatedly begins to change what feels normal. That is where repetition enters the story. The choice you make today can become easier tomorrow, not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because your mind begins learning through practice. You are no longer merely deciding what to do, you are training what you naturally do. And the next chapter will take that idea further, because the most powerful changes rarely come from one heroic effort. They come from ordinary actions repeated until they become part of your default way of living. Chapter 5. Turn repetition into the engine of your transformation. You have learned to notice your thoughts, question old stories, build a deliberate identity, and choose meaningful action over immediate comfort. But there is a problem that quietly defeats many good intentions. People expect a few powerful decisions to create permanent change. They rarely do. One disciplined morning does not make you disciplined. One focused afternoon does not make you focused. One courageous conversation does not permanently remove fear. A single good decision is a beginning, not a transformation. What changes you is what you continue doing after the excitement disappears. Repetition is where intention becomes conditioning. Think about the path you take through a familiar neighborhood. The first time you walk it, you pay attention to every turn. After hundreds of trips, you barely think about the route. Your feet seem to know where to go before you consciously decide. Your mind works in a similar way. The thoughts, reactions, and behaviors you repeat become increasingly familiar. Familiarity does not automatically make something good, but it makes the pattern easier to access. This explains why an old habit can feel automatic even when you consciously dislike it. You have practiced it. You have repeated the trigger, the reaction, and the reward so many times that the sequence begins running with little conscious effort. The good news is that the same mechanism can work in your favor. If you repeatedly pause before reacting, pausing becomes easier. If you repeatedly begin difficult work without waiting for motivation, starting becomes less dramatic. If you repeatedly put your phone away during focused work, concentration becomes easier to protect. If you repeatedly keep small promises to yourself, reliability becomes part of your self-image. This gives us a practical principle. What you repeat becomes easier to repeat. That does not mean every repetition produces immediate visible results. Often, progress is happening quietly. Imagine planting a seed. For several days, the surface may look unchanged. That does not necessarily mean nothing is happening. Growth can occur before it becomes visible. Your habits are similar. You may practice patience for 2 weeks and still become irritated. You may practice focus and still get distracted. You may practice discipline and still procrastinate occasionally. Do not confuse imperfect repetition with useless repetition. The objective is not to perform perfectly. The objective is to keep returning to the behavior you want to strengthen. This is why you need a system simple enough to survive ordinary life. Choose one mental pattern and one behavior. For example, mental pattern: I can begin before I feel ready. Behavior: start the important task for 10 minutes without checking your phone. Or, mental pattern: a mistake is information, not an identity. Behavior: after making an error, write down one lesson before criticizing yourself. Then repeat. Do not add 10 habits at once. Your mind does not need a crowded improvement project. It needs a clear signal repeated often enough to become familiar. Try the 30-day repetition experiment. For 30 days, choose one behavior that represents the identity you want to build. Make it small enough that you can perform it even on an ordinary, imperfect day. Track whether you completed it. Do not track your mood. Do not track whether you felt inspired. Track the behavior. This matters because motivation can create a misleading picture. You might feel energized on Monday and exhausted on Thursday. If your system depends on enthusiasm, Thursday becomes a failure. If your system depends on a small commitment, Thursday becomes another opportunity to practice. Use the rule: never miss twice. Missing once is a mistake. Missing twice can begin creating a new pattern. If you fail to complete your habit today, do not spend tomorrow feeling guilty about today. Return immediately. The faster you return, the less power the interruption has. There is another important part of repetition. Repetition should include correction. Do not mindlessly repeat the same behavior and call it discipline. Review your process. Ask once a week: what worked? What repeatedly interrupted me? What should I make easier? What should I remove? What can I change before the next attempt? This turns repetition into deliberate practice. A person who repeats without reflection may reinforce inefficient behavior. A person who repeats, observes, adjusts, and repeats again is training. That distinction matters. You are not trying to become a machine that performs the same routine forever. You are developing the ability to intentionally strengthen useful patterns. And eventually, something remarkable begins to happen. The behavior that once required a debate becomes easier to start. The reaction that once happened automatically begins to feel optional. The commitment that once felt difficult becomes ordinary. You have moved from forcing a behavior to familiarizing your mind with it. But repetition also reveals another truth. Your habits do not operate in an emotional vacuum. Some days your mind will resist. Anger will rise, fear will appear, frustration will interrupt your plans. That is why the next stage of this journey is not about repeating actions harder. It is about learning how to experience emotion without allowing emotion to automatically decide what you do. Chapter 6. Feel your emotions without letting them choose for you. You can know exactly what you want to do and still find yourself doing something completely different. You planned to stay focused, but frustration pushed you toward distraction. You intended to respond calmly, but one comment made you react instantly. You promised yourself that you would continue, but one difficult moment convinced you to stop. This is where emotional control becomes part of discipline. The goal is not to eliminate difficult emotions. That would be unrealistic. Fear, anger, disappointment, insecurity, boredom, excitement, and frustration are normal parts of being human. The real skill is learning to experience an emotion without automatically turning it into an instruction. Think about the difference between these two statements. I feel like quitting. I should quit. They sound similar, but they are not the same. The first describes an emotional experience. The second turns that experience into a decision. That small difference can change your behavior. An emotion can be loud without being correct. When you are frustrated, your mind may say, forget it. When you are embarrassed, it may say, never do that again. When you are angry, it may tell you to respond immediately. When you are afraid, it may insist that avoiding the situation is the safest option. Sometimes those impulses contain useful information, but sometimes they are simply attempts to escape discomfort. Your responsibility is to create enough space to determine which one you are dealing with. Use the pause, name, choose method. First, pause. Do not immediately send the message, abandon the task, make the decision, or react to the person. Give yourself a few seconds. If necessary, walk away briefly. Second, name what is happening. Say internally, I am frustrated, I am embarrassed, I am anxious, I am feeling rejected. Naming the emotion creates psychological distance. Instead of being completely absorbed by the experience, you begin observing it. Third, choose. Ask, what response would help me respect the person I am trying to become? This question connects emotional control with the identity work from earlier chapters. Suppose someone criticizes your work. Your immediate impulse may be defensiveness. You could respond sharply, withdraw, or spend the rest of the day thinking about the insult. Instead, pause. Name the emotion. I feel embarrassed and defensive. Then choose. I will listen for anything useful before deciding how I feel about the criticism. That does not mean accepting every criticism as true. It means refusing to let the first emotional reaction make the entire decision. Practice this in small situations before expecting yourself to use it during major emotional moments. When you become irritated by a delay, pause. When you feel the urge to check your phone during focused work, pause. When you want to reply immediately to a frustrating message, pause. Each pause is a repetition, and repetition strengthens the ability to create space between feeling and action. There is another important distinction. Emotional control is not emotional suppression. Suppression says, I should not feel this. Regulation says, I feel this and I can decide what to do with it. You do not need to shame yourself for being angry. You need to understand what the anger is signaling. You do not need to pretend fear is absent. You need to decide whether fear deserves control of the next step. Try a simple evening review. Choose one emotional moment from your day and ask, what happened? What did I feel? What did I want to do immediately? What did I actually do? What would I choose next time? Do this without judging yourself. You are studying your patterns. Eventually, you may notice something encouraging. The emotion itself may not disappear, but your relationship with it changes. You begin recognizing the familiar surge before it becomes behavior. That is progress. A powerful mind is not emotionless. It is responsive without being controlled. And once you learn to protect your choices from emotional impulses, you discover another force competing for those choices every day. Distraction. Your attention is constantly being requested by people, devices, information, entertainment, and your own wandering mind. The next challenge is to decide what deserves your attention and what does not. Chapter 7. Protect your attention before distraction steals your direction. You have learned that emotions can influence your choices without needing to control them. Now consider another force that quietly shapes your behavior every day. Attention. Whatever repeatedly receives your attention begins to occupy space in your mental world. If you constantly focus on problems, problems can start feeling larger. If you repeatedly watch other people's lives, comparison can become automatic. If you continually switch between messages, videos, notifications, and unfinished tasks, your mind can become accustomed to interruption. Attention is not simply something you have, it is something you spend. And most people spend it without checking where it goes. Think about an ordinary afternoon. You sit down to complete an important task. Your phone lights up. You check one notification. A message appears. You answer it. Then you remember something unrelated and search for it. A video catches your attention. 10 minutes later, you return to the original task and wonder why it feels so difficult to concentrate. Nothing dramatic happened, yet your attention was divided into pieces. The problem is not that every distraction is harmful. The problem is allowing everything to compete equally for your mind. If everything deserves your attention, nothing receives your full attention. That is why you need an attention budget. Think of your attention as a limited daily resource. You cannot give unlimited focus to work, learning, relationships, entertainment, social media, worries, and random information. Every yes consumes some of that resource, so begin asking a different question. Where is my attention going? For one day, observe it without trying to change anything. Notice how often you check your phone without a specific reason. Notice how frequently you switch tasks. Notice which conversations remain in your head long after they end. Notice what content leaves you energized and what content leaves you scattered. You are not conducting a moral investigation. You are measuring your mental habits. Then make one change. Create a protected focus period. It could be 20 minutes, 30 minutes, or 45 minutes. During that period, choose one meaningful task and remove obvious interruptions. Put the phone away, close unnecessary tabs, silence non-essential notifications. Tell people nearby that you need uninterrupted time if appropriate, then work. When your mind says, "Let me check something quickly," notice the impulse without automatically obeying it. This is where your previous chapter becomes useful. The same pause you practiced with emotions can be used with distraction. Pause. Notice the impulse. Choose whether it deserves your attention. You may discover that many urges disappear when you do not immediately feed them. This is not about becoming rigid or avoiding entertainment. Rest matters, conversation matters, enjoyment matters. A balanced life requires all of them. The objective is to make these choices deliberately rather than allowing algorithms, notifications, boredom, or habit to make them for you. You can also create attention boundaries. For example, decide that you will not begin your morning with random information. Give yourself a period before checking messages or social media. Decide that certain hours are reserved for focused work. Create moments when you deliberately leave your phone outside the room. Small boundaries can have a surprisingly large effect because they reduce the number of decisions your mind must make. There is another important practice. Finish more things before starting new things. Constantly beginning new tasks creates the feeling of activity without necessarily producing meaningful progress. When possible, choose one priority, stay with it, and bring it to a clear stopping point. At the end of the day, conduct a short attention review. Ask, what received most of my attention today? Did that deserve it? What repeatedly distracted me? What will I protect tomorrow? These questions turn attention from something accidental into something intentional, and something else will become clear. When you stop constantly looking outward, you begin noticing another habit, looking sideways. You may protect your focus from notifications, only to lose it by comparing your progress with someone else's. You may work for an hour and then undermine your confidence by watching another person's achievements and wondering why your life does not look the same. Attention is not only stolen by screens, sometimes it is stolen by comparison. The next step, therefore, is to reclaim your attention from other people's timelines and return it to the only scoreboard you can truly control: your own progress. Chapter 8. Break the comparison habit and build your own scoreboard. You have just learned how to protect your attention, but protecting attention from notifications, entertainment, and interruptions is only part of the challenge. There is another distraction that can occupy your mind without making a sound: comparison. You can sit in a quiet room with your phone turned off and still spend an hour mentally competing with someone who is not even there. You see someone else's progress and immediately question your own. Someone seems more confident, more disciplined, more successful, more socially comfortable, or further ahead. Without realizing it, their life becomes the measuring stick for yours. This is where comparison becomes dangerous. Comparison does not always begin with jealousy. Sometimes it begins with curiosity. You notice what someone else is doing and think, "I should be doing that too." Then the thought becomes pressure. Pressure becomes self-criticism. Self-criticism weakens your focus. Eventually, instead of working on your own development, you are mentally monitoring somebody else's progress. You have moved from building your life to judging your life. There is an important distinction here. Observing someone else's behavior can be useful. Comparing your worth to their results is not. Someone else's progress can teach you something. It does not have to become evidence against you. Imagine two people learning the same skill. One has practiced for 3 years, the other has practiced for 3 months. If the beginner compares today's performance with the experienced person's performance, discouragement is almost guaranteed. But if the beginner compares today's performance with their own performance from 3 weeks ago, the measurement becomes meaningful. This leads to a simple principle: measure direction, not just position. Where you are today matters, but the direction in which you are moving matters too. That is why you need a personal scoreboard. A personal scoreboard measures behaviors that are actually within your influence. Instead of asking, "Am I as successful as that person?" ask, "How consistently did I practice? How often did I keep my commitments? How much better did I handle difficult emotions? How many times did I choose focus over distraction? How quickly did I recover after a mistake?" These questions give you something comparison cannot: useful information. Create 3 personal measurements. They should be simple, visible, and connected to the person you are trying to become. For example, if you want greater discipline, track how many days you completed your chosen habit. If you want better focus, track uninterrupted work sessions. If you want emotional control, track how often you successfully paused before reacting. Do not make the scoreboard complicated. The purpose is not to turn your life into a spreadsheet. The purpose is to make progress visible. You can also create a past self-check. Once a week, compare yourself with who you were 7 days ago. Ask, "What can I do now that I struggled to do before?" What reaction has become easier to control? What habit is becoming more consistent? Where am I still repeating the same pattern? This creates a more honest form of confidence. You are no longer waiting for someone else to validate your progress. You are gathering evidence from your own behavior. But comparison has another hidden problem. It can make you chase goals that were never yours. You may admire someone's lifestyle, career, confidence, social presence, or achievements, and assume you should want the same thing. But admiration and personal purpose are not identical. Ask yourself, if nobody could see my progress, what would I still want to improve? That question can be uncomfortable because it removes the audience. Without an audience, some goals lose their attraction. Others become more meaningful. That is valuable information. You should not build your identity around impressing people you may never meet or competing with people who do not know they are competing with you. Your responsibility is to build your own standards. This does not mean ignoring excellent examples. Study people, learn from them, observe how they practice, communicate, solve problems, and handle difficulty. But take the lesson without taking the comparison. Say, what can I learn from this? Rather than, why am I not there yet? The first question creates movement. The second often creates shame, and shame is a poor long-term strategy for growth. There will still be moments when comparison catches you. That is normal. The goal is not to eliminate the instinct completely. The goal is to recognize it quickly. When you notice yourself comparing, use the return question. What is one useful thing I can do with my own life right now? Then do it. Close the app, return to the task, practice the skill, take the walk, read the page, make the call, keep the promise, turn comparison into movement. Your attention is too valuable to spend repeatedly measuring a life you cannot control. And once you begin measuring yourself by your own actions, another truth becomes easier to face. Genuine progress will include mistakes. You will miss days. You will make poor choices. You will fall short of your own standards. The question is no longer whether setbacks will happen. The question is what meaning you will give them. Will one mistake become proof that you are incapable, or will it become information that helps you improve? That is where the next stage of the journey begins. Chapter 9. Turn setbacks into training instead of turning them into identity. If you are serious about personal growth, you need to make peace with an uncomfortable fact. You will sometimes fail. You will lose focus after promising yourself you would concentrate. You will miss a habit you intended to maintain. You will say something you wish you had said differently. You will make a decision that seemed reasonable at the time and later realize it was not. Some efforts will simply produce disappointing results. None of this makes you incapable of growth. The real danger begins when a setback becomes a definition. There is a major psychological difference between saying, I handled that badly, and saying, I am bad at everything. The first statement describes an event. The second turns an event into identity. Once that happens, failure becomes more than something you experienced. It becomes something you start expecting. Imagine someone trying to build a consistent exercise habit. They follow the routine for 12 days and then miss 3 days. Instead of examining what happened, they say, I knew I couldn't stay consistent. That sentence may feel like an honest observation, but it quietly converts 3 missed days into evidence for an old identity. Then the person stops trying. The original setback lasted 3 days. The identity they created from it can last years. This is why learning how to interpret failure is a mental skill. You do not need to make failure feel positive. Some failures genuinely hurt. Some mistakes have consequences. Some decisions deserve regret. Growth does not require pretending everything is fine. It requires asking a more useful question. What can this experience teach me? That question changes your position. Instead of standing inside the failure, you step outside it and study it. Use the failure debrief whenever something goes wrong. First ask, what actually happened? Separate facts from emotional interpretation. What did you do? What happened afterward? Avoid exaggerations, such as everything went wrong when only one part failed. Second ask, what was within my control? Maybe you could have prepared better. Maybe you could not control another person's reaction. Maybe you ignored an obvious warning. Maybe the outcome depended partly on circumstances you could not influence. Be honest about the difference. Third ask, what did this reveal? Perhaps your plan was unrealistic. Perhaps your environment encouraged distraction. Perhaps you underestimated the difficulty. Perhaps you lacked a skill. Perhaps you acted impulsively because you were emotionally overwhelmed. A setback often reveals a weakness in the system rather than a weakness in your entire character. Fourth ask, what will I change? Do not create 10 corrections. Choose the one adjustment most likely to prevent the same problem. Fifth ask, what can I do within the next 24 hours? This final question matters because reflection without action can become another form of avoidance. If you failed to maintain a habit, restart it tomorrow. If you made a mistake in your work, correct what you can. If you reacted badly during a conversation, acknowledge it and repair the situation where appropriate. If distraction destroyed your focus, change the environment before the next work session. Action closes the learning loop. There is also something important to understand about resilience. Recovering quickly does not mean pretending the setback did not matter. It means refusing to give the setback more authority than it deserves. You can say, that was a mistake, without saying, that is who I am. You can say, I lost control of my emotions, without saying, I will always be emotionally unstable. You can say, I broke my routine, without saying, I can never be disciplined. Language matters because your mind is constantly interpreting what happens to you. You also need to stop expecting a perfect recovery. Sometimes you will need time. Sometimes you will feel disappointed for a while. Sometimes the lesson becomes clear only after reflection. Give yourself enough space to process what happened, but do not build a permanent home inside the setback. A useful rule is feel it, study it, correct it, continue. That is more realistic than pretending you should immediately bounce back with enthusiasm. Now put this into practice. Think of one recent setback that still bothers you. Write down the 5 failure debrief questions. Be specific. Avoid insults. Do not write about your character. Write about your behavior, circumstances, decisions, and consequences. Then identify one corrective action. Do it. That action is important because it turns reflection into evidence. You are proving that a mistake can become a teacher instead of a prison. And something else begins to happen when you repeatedly recover this way. You become less dependent on feeling perfect before moving forward. That will become essential in the next chapter, because eventually you will face a day when there is no inspiration, no excitement, no emotional momentum, and no convenient excuse. On that day, your progress will depend on something more reliable than motivation. It will depend on discipline. Chapter 10. Build discipline that works, even when motivation disappears. There will be days when you feel inspired to improve your life. You wake up with energy, make ambitious plans, and genuinely believe you can follow through on everything you have decided. Then there will be other days. You wake up tired, your mind feels heavy, the task you plan to complete seems boring, your phone feels more attractive than your responsibilities. You tell yourself you will start later, and later quietly becomes tomorrow. This is where motivation reveals its limitation. Motivation is useful, but it is unstable. It rises and falls with sleep, stress, emotions, environment, and circumstances. If your behavior depends entirely on how motivated you feel, your consistency will always be vulnerable to your mood. Discipline gives you another option. Discipline does not mean forcing yourself to work at maximum intensity every day. It means maintaining a meaningful commitment even when your emotional state is not cooperating. That distinction matters. A disciplined person is not someone who never wants to quit. It is someone who has learned that wanting to quit and actually quitting are two different decisions. Start by making your commitments smaller. Many people create habits that require an unrealistic version of themselves. They decide they will exercise for an hour every morning, read 50 pages every night, meditate for 30 minutes, and complete several hours of uninterrupted work. The plan feels exciting on day 1 and impossible on day 10. Instead, create what we can call minimum viable discipline. This is the smallest version of a behavior that still keeps your identity alive. If your goal is reading, read 2 pages. If your goal is exercise, move for 10 minutes. If your goal is writing, write 1 paragraph. If your goal is focused work, begin with 15 uninterrupted minutes. The point is not that small actions are always enough. The point is that they keep the chain from disappearing when circumstances become difficult. On strong days, you can do more. On difficult days, you maintain the minimum. This creates an important psychological message. My mood can change, but my commitment does not have to disappear. That message strengthens self-trust. You should also stop negotiating endlessly with yourself. If something matters, decide in advance when and how you will do it. The more often you debate whether to begin, the more opportunities your mind has to invent reasons to postpone. Create a simple rule. I begin my important task before entertainment. I exercise before I spend the evening scrolling. I prepare tomorrow before going to bed. Rules reduce unnecessary negotiation. But discipline should not become punishment. If you are genuinely exhausted or unwell, adjusting your plan can be responsible rather than weak. Discipline requires judgment. The objective is not to ignore reality. It is to stop using temporary discomfort as a permanent excuse. At the end of each day, ask yourself 1 question. Did I keep the commitment I made to myself? If yes, acknowledge the evidence. If no, do not create a dramatic story about failure. Ask why. Was the habit too large? Was the timing poor? Was the environment full of distractions? Did you forget? Did you rely too heavily on motivation? Then make 1 adjustment and continue. This creates a more sustainable relationship with discipline. You are not trying to prove that you can suffer. You are learning how to keep moving. Try another exercise today. Choose 1 habit you genuinely want to strengthen. Reduce it to a version that takes no more than 15 minutes. Decide exactly when you will perform it. Then complete it before the day ends. Do not wait for the perfect mood. Do not make the task dramatic. Just begin. Tomorrow, repeat it. Then repeat it again. Eventually, the goal is not to remain dependent on the tiny version forever. The goal is to create such a reliable foundation that increasing the challenge becomes natural. Discipline grows through evidence. Every time you act according to your commitment instead of your mood, you strengthen the identity you began building earlier. But there is one more reality to face. Even strong discipline becomes unnecessarily difficult when your surroundings constantly encourage the opposite behavior. If your phone is always within reach, distractions are always available. If unhealthy routines are built into your environment, resisting them requires repeated effort. If your workspace is chaotic, beginning meaningful work becomes harder. You can fight your environment every day, or you can redesign it. The next chapter is about doing exactly that, creating surroundings that make the person you are becoming easier to practice. Chapter 11. Design your environment to make better choices easier. You have already learned that discipline matters when motivation disappears. But there is another truth that can make discipline much easier. Your surroundings are constantly influencing your behavior. Most people try to change themselves while leaving everything around them unchanged. They want better focus while keeping their phone beside them. They want to read more while placing entertainment within immediate reach. They want healthier routines while surrounding themselves with reminders of old habits. Then, when they struggle, they blame themselves for lacking willpower. Sometimes the problem is not that you are weak. Sometimes the environment is simply making the unwanted behavior too easy. Your surroundings are silent instructions. A notification says, "Look here." A phone on your desk says, "Check me." A messy workspace can create friction before you even begin. A book placed beside your bed quietly suggests reading. A prepared workout space can reduce the number of excuses required to begin. You do not need to redesign your entire life overnight. Start by identifying one behavior you want to strengthen and one behavior you want to reduce. Then ask a practical question. How can I make the behavior I want easier to begin? If you want to read, put the book somewhere visible and convenient. If you want focused work, prepare your workspace before the session begins. If you want to practice a skill, keep the necessary materials ready. If you want to spend less time checking your phone, place it farther away during important activities. The goal is to reduce friction. At the same time, make unwanted behaviors slightly harder. You do not have to eliminate every distraction. Just create one extra step between the impulse and the behavior. Turn off unnecessary notifications. Log out of distracting platforms. Keep entertainment outside your immediate workspace. Put your phone in another room during a focused session. That extra distance can create something valuable. A moment to reconsider. This is the friction principle. Make useful actions easier. Make distracting actions require more effort. It sounds simple because it is simple, but simple does not mean ineffective. Consider a person who repeatedly checks their phone while working. They might spend the day telling themselves, "I need more self-control." Instead, they place the phone in another room for 30-minute work sessions. Nothing about their personality changed. The environment changed. And because the environment changed, the number of decisions requiring willpower decreased. This is important because willpower is not an unlimited resource. Constantly resisting temptation consumes mental energy. A well-designed environment removes some of those battles before they begin. Your environment also includes people. Pay attention to the conversations and expectations surrounding you. Some environments normalize effort, learning, patience, and responsibility. Others constantly encourage distraction, complaining, impulsiveness, or giving up. This does not mean abandoning everyone who thinks differently from you. It means becoming conscious of what repeatedly enters your mental space. Ask, what behaviors become normal around the people I spend time with? What attitudes become stronger after these conversations? Do my surroundings support the identity I am trying to build? Again, the goal is not judgment, it is awareness. Your digital environment deserves the same attention. Your phone may be one of the most influential environments you enter every day. The content you repeatedly consume can affect your attention, emotional state, expectations, and self-perception. You cannot control everything you encounter, but you can make choices about what you repeatedly invite into your mind. Unfollow what consistently makes you feel inadequate. Reduce content that leaves you scattered. Keep useful material accessible. Create periods during the day when you consume nothing and simply think. Your mind needs input, but it also needs silence. Now create an environment reset. Choose one room, workspace, or digital space. Remove one distraction. Add one useful cue. Prepare one tool you need for an important habit. Then observe whether beginning becomes easier. Do not expect your environment to do the work for you. It will not. It simply changes the starting conditions. You still have to choose. But when your surroundings support the choice, consistency becomes more realistic. And this brings us to a deeper issue. Even a well-designed environment cannot remove every difficult moment. Eventually, you will have to make choices when nobody is watching, when there is no reward, and when you could easily take the easier path without consequences. That is where self-trust becomes essential. The next chapter will show you how to build it through the promises you make and keep to yourself. Chapter 12. Keep small promises and build unshakable self-trust. You have learned how your environment can make certain behaviors easier or harder, but even the best environment cannot make every decision for you. Eventually, there will be moments when nobody is watching, motivation is low, distractions are available, and you have to decide whether you will do what you said you would do. That is where self-trust begins. Self-trust is not the same as confidence. Confidence often means believing you can handle a particular situation. Self-trust is deeper. It is the quiet expectation that when you make a reasonable commitment to yourself, you will make a serious effort to honor it. Many people struggle with self-trust because they repeatedly make promises that are too large to maintain. They announce that everything will change tomorrow. They create an intense routine, follow it for a few days, miss one part, and then abandon the entire plan. After repeating this cycle, they begin believing their own promises less. The problem is not a lack of ambition. The problem is a lack of credibility with themselves. Think about a friend who constantly promises to arrive on time, but repeatedly appears late. Eventually, even if that friend makes another sincere promise, you become cautious. You have learned from the pattern. Your mind learns in the same way. When you repeatedly tell yourself, "I will do this," and then do not, your internal trust can weaken. When you make smaller commitments and consistently keep them, something different happens. Your mind receives evidence that your words and actions can match. That is why the solution is not to make bigger promises. It is to make credible promises. Start with something small enough to complete on an ordinary day. Instead of saying, "I will completely transform my routine," say, "I will spend 15 focused minutes on this important task today." Instead of, "I will never waste time again," say, "For the next 30 minutes, my phone will stay away from me." Instead of, "I will become perfectly disciplined," say, "I will complete the one habit I committed to today." Then keep the promise. This creates what we can call the trust deposit principle. Every kept promise is a small deposit into your relationship with yourself. One deposit may seem insignificant. Hundreds of deposits create a different internal expectation. When I decide something matters, I can rely on myself to act. The reverse is also true. Repeatedly breaking unnecessary promises creates withdrawals. This does not mean you should become rigid. Life changes. Unexpected responsibilities appear. Sometimes a commitment genuinely needs to be modified. That is not the same as casually abandoning it. If circumstances change, renegotiate deliberately. Say, "This commitment no longer fits today, so I will move it to tomorrow at a specific time." That is different from saying, "I will do it sometime later." Precision protects trust. Another important rule is to stop making promises based on your idealized self. Your idealized self wakes up early, exercises perfectly, eats perfectly, reads constantly, stays calm under pressure, never procrastinates, and completes every task. Your real self gets tired. Your real self becomes distracted. Your real self sometimes has difficult days. Build commitments for the person you actually are, while gradually developing the person you want to become. This is not lowering your standards. It is creating a foundation strong enough to carry higher standards later. Use a daily promise practice. Each morning, choose one meaningful promise that can realistically be completed that day. Write it down, make it specific, decide when you will do it, then complete it before the day ends. At night, record whether you kept it. If you did, acknowledge it without exaggeration. If you did not, investigate without insult. Ask, why did I break the commitment? Was the commitment unrealistic? What obstacle appeared? What can I change tomorrow? Then make the next promise more intelligent. Over time, you may notice something powerful. You begin needing less external encouragement because your own history becomes evidence. You have seen yourself begin when you did not feel ready. You have seen yourself recover after setbacks. You have seen yourself maintain habits through ordinary difficulties. You have seen yourself pause instead of reacting. Those memories become psychological resources. This is how self-trust grows. Not through repeating impressive statements, but through repeated experiences of following through. And there is another benefit. When you trust yourself, decisions become less exhausting. You do not need to constantly debate whether you will follow through. Your behavior becomes more predictable to you. But self-trust does not mean becoming obsessed with productivity or turning every day into a test of discipline. A powerful mind also knows when to slow down, reflect, recover, and adjust. You are building a relationship with yourself, not managing a machine. So begin today. Make one promise. Make it realistic. Make it meaningful. Keep it. Tomorrow, make another. Then continue. Because every time your actions confirm your word, you strengthen something more valuable than temporary motivation, the belief that you can depend on yourself. And once that foundation becomes stronger, you are ready to face another challenge, using your mind deliberately when life becomes uncertain, uncomfortable, or unpredictable. The next chapter is about learning how to think clearly when you do not have complete control over what happens next. Chapter 13. Train your mind to stay clear when life becomes uncertain. You have learned to observe your thoughts, rewrite limiting stories, build identity through action, practice discipline, protect your attention, recover from setbacks, shape your environment, and strengthen self-trust through small promises. But even with all of those skills, life will still surprise you. Plans will change, people will disappoint you, opportunities will disappear. Conversations will go differently than expected. Your effort will sometimes produce an outcome you did not want. There will be situations where you simply do not know what happens next. This is where mental strength becomes more realistic. A powerful mind does not require certainty before taking action. It learns how to remain useful inside uncertainty. Many people respond to uncertainty by trying to predict everything. They replay conversations, imagine possible disasters, search endlessly for reassurance, or postpone decisions until they feel completely certain. But complete certainty is rarely available. Waiting for it can become another form of avoidance. Imagine standing at the beginning of a foggy road. You can see only a short distance ahead. You might wish the entire road were visible before taking a step. But the absence of a full view does not mean you cannot move. You can take the next visible step, then reassess. That is how you can approach uncertain situations. Do not demand an answer for the entire future. Find the next useful decision. This creates the next step principle. When you cannot control the whole situation, identify what you can influence now. Suppose you are worried about an important conversation. You cannot control exactly how the other person will respond, but you can prepare your thoughts, choose your words carefully, listen attentively, and decide how you want to behave, regardless of their reaction. Suppose you are learning something difficult. You cannot guarantee immediate mastery, but you can practice, ask questions, review mistakes, and continue. Suppose your plans suddenly change. You cannot control the change itself, but you can decide how quickly you will stop resisting reality and begin adapting. This is not passive acceptance, it is practical control. A useful exercise is to divide a difficult situation into 3 categories: control, influence, release. Control includes your choices, preparation, attention, words, effort, and responses. Influence includes things you may affect but cannot guarantee, such as another person's opinion or the outcome of a conversation. Release includes things that are outside your authority, such as the past, other people's private decisions, or events that have already happened. Write these categories down when you feel overwhelmed. Then act on the first category. Work with the second. Stop spending unnecessary mental energy fighting the third. This simple separation can create clarity because anxiety often grows when everything feels equally urgent and equally controllable. You should also become careful with imagined futures. Your mind can create an entire chain of negative events from one uncertain detail. Someone does not reply to your message, and your mind imagines rejection. You make a mistake and your mind predicts permanent failure. You experience one difficult day and your mind concludes that the future will always look like this. Notice what is happening. You are treating a possibility as though it were a fact. When you catch yourself doing this, ask, what do I actually know? What am I assuming? What can I do regardless? These questions bring you back to reality. You can also practice controlled uncertainty. Once a day, deliberately allow a small situation to remain unresolved without immediately seeking reassurance. Leave a message unanswered until the appropriate time. Make a reasonable decision without checking 10 additional opinions. Sit quietly with an unanswered question for a few minutes. The goal is not to become careless. The goal is to teach your nervous system that uncertainty can be uncomfortable without being dangerous. You do not need to solve every unknown immediately. Another useful practice is to create decision windows. If you are facing a decision that does not require immediate action, choose a specific period for thinking about it. Gather the relevant information, consider the consequences, make the best reasonable decision, and then stop reopening the question every 10 minutes. Constant reconsideration can feel like careful thinking while actually becoming mental exhaustion. Clear thinking requires boundaries too, and remember, clarity does not mean always making the perfect decision. Sometimes you will choose incorrectly. The goal is to make thoughtful decisions with the information available and then learn from the result. This connects directly to everything you have practiced so far. Awareness helps you notice fear. Identity helps you remember who you want to be. Discipline helps you act despite discomfort. Attention helps you focus on what matters. Self-trust helps you believe you can handle the consequences. Together, these skills create psychological flexibility. You become less dependent on life behaving exactly as planned. That is a powerful form of freedom. So the next time uncertainty appears, do not immediately ask, how do I make sure everything works out? Ask, what is the most useful thing I can do with what I know right now? Then do that. You may not see the entire road. You do not need to. Take the next step, gather new information, adjust your direction, and continue. Because mental strength is not the ability to predict every turn. It is the ability to keep moving intelligently when the next turn has not yet revealed itself. And as you become comfortable with uncertainty, you are ready for an even deeper challenge, learning to direct your inner voice so that it supports growth without becoming either cruel or unrealistic. Chapter 14. Speak to yourself in a way that builds strength. You have learned to stay steady when life is uncertain. Now turn your attention inward again, because one of the most influential conversations in your life is the one nobody else can hear, the way you speak to yourself. Your inner dialogue follows you everywhere. It appears after mistakes, before difficult tasks, during conflict, and in quiet moments when nobody is distracting you. Sometimes it encourages you. Sometimes it criticizes you. Sometimes it repeats old conclusions you accepted years ago without ever examining them. The problem is not that you have a critical voice. Self-evaluation can be useful. The problem begins when criticism becomes your default method of improvement. Imagine making a mistake at work. One inner voice says, "That did not go well. Find out why and fix it." Another says, "You always mess things up. You should have known better." Both responses recognize that something went wrong, but only one creates a clear path forward. The first examines behavior, the second attacks identity. A strong inner voice does not lie to you. It does not tell you that every mistake is secretly wonderful. It tells you the truth without turning the truth into a weapon. This is the truth without cruelty principle. Be honest about what needs improvement, but speak about yourself in a way that leaves room for improvement. Instead of saying, "I am lazy," say, "I avoided an important task today. What made starting difficult?" Instead of, "I have no discipline," say, "My consistency broke down this week. I need to examine the routine." Instead of, "I am terrible at handling pressure," say, "I reacted emotionally under pressure. What can I practice before the next situation?" Notice the difference. The second version does not excuse the behavior. It makes the behavior changeable. Your language can either close a door or leave it open. Start listening for words such as always, never, everyone, and nothing. These words often turn one event into a permanent conclusion. I always procrastinate. I never finish anything. Everyone is ahead of me. Nothing I do works. When you hear these statements, challenge them. Ask, is this completely true? What evidence am I ignoring? What would be a more accurate description? Accuracy is more useful than exaggerated positivity. You should also change how you speak to yourself before difficult actions. Instead of predicting failure, give yourself an instruction. Do not say, "This is going to be too hard." Say, "Start with the first step." Do not say, "I am not ready." Say, "Prepare what you can, then begin." Do not say, "What if I fail?" Say, "If something goes wrong, I will learn and adjust." This turns inner dialogue from commentary into guidance. Try the inner coach exercise for 7 days. At the end of each day, write down one moment when you criticized yourself. Then rewrite the statement as if you were speaking to someone you genuinely wanted to help. If you wrote, "I was useless today," change it to, "Today did not go as planned. Tomorrow I will protect my first hour from distraction." If you wrote, "I ruined everything," change it to, "One part of the situation went badly. I can identify what happened and repair what I can." This exercise does not make you soft. It makes your thinking more precise. You should also learn to recognize the difference between accountability and shame. Accountability says, "My behavior had consequences, and I am responsible for responding." Shame says, "My behavior proves that something is fundamentally wrong with me." Accountability creates action. Shame often creates hiding, avoidance, and resignation. You want the first. Your inner voice should challenge you when necessary, but it should also remind you that one bad decision does not erase every good decision you have made. You are allowed to correct yourself without destroying yourself. Practice this today. Catch one harsh thought. Pause. Rewrite it accurately. Then identify one action that follows from the revised statement. That final step matters because useful self-talk should eventually lead to useful behavior. You are not trying to create a voice that praises everything you do. You are creating a voice that helps you face reality, learn from it, and move forward. And as that voice becomes stronger, you will discover something important. Your inner dialogue influences not only how you respond to mistakes, but also how willing you are to attempt difficult things in the first place. That brings us to the next challenge, learning how to turn fear of failure into the courage to act. Chapter 15. Act before fear finishes, writing the story. Fear rarely announces itself as fear. Sometimes it sounds like preparation. Sometimes it sounds like logic. Sometimes it sounds like patience. I need more information. I should wait until I am more confident. Maybe this is not the right time. These statements can be reasonable, but they can also become sophisticated ways of avoiding action. The problem is not feeling afraid. The problem is allowing fear to become the author of your decisions. You have already learned that emotions are experiences, not instructions. Now, apply that lesson directly to fear. Fear often tries to predict the future using incomplete information. You imagine making a mistake, being judged, looking inexperienced, disappointing someone, or discovering that you are not as capable as you hoped. The mind creates a possible outcome, then reacts emotionally as though the outcome has already happened. But possibility is not certainty. You may fail. You may also succeed. You may discover that the situation was less difficult than you expected. You may learn something valuable even if the result is not what you wanted. You cannot discover any of this while standing permanently at the starting line. This is why courage should not be defined as feeling fearless. Courage is the ability to move responsibly while fear is present. Consider someone who wants to speak more confidently. They wait until they feel completely comfortable speaking in front of others. That moment may never arrive. Instead, they could begin with one small contribution in a conversation, then another, then a short presentation, gradually teaching their mind that being visible is survivable. Confidence often follows action. It does not always come before it. Use the courage ladder. Take something you have been avoiding and divide it into progressively more challenging steps. If you fear difficult conversations, begin by expressing a small preference honestly. Then practice disagreeing respectfully. Later, address a minor unresolved issue. Eventually, approach more meaningful conversations. If you fear starting a creative project, begin by creating privately. Then share something small with one trusted person. Gradually increase your exposure. The purpose is not to overwhelm yourself. It is to build evidence. Every completed step tells your mind, I can experience discomfort and remain functional. That evidence matters more than motivational slogans. You should also separate risk from discomfort. Some situations genuinely require caution. If an action could create serious harm, rushing forward simply to prove courage is not strength. A powerful mind evaluates consequences. But many situations feel dangerous simply because they are unfamiliar. Ask yourself, is this actually unsafe or is it simply uncomfortable? That question can prevent you from confusing nervousness with danger. Another useful tool is the 10-minute courage rule. When you are avoiding a meaningful task because you feel afraid, commit to working on it for only 10 minutes. You do not need to promise yourself that you will finish everything. You only need to begin. Write the first paragraph. Make the first call. Practice the first exercise. Prepare the first step. Have the opening part of the conversation. 10 minutes gives your mind a smaller challenge to accept. Once action begins, the imagined difficulty often becomes more realistic. You can also ask a powerful question. What will avoiding this teach me about myself? If you repeatedly avoid difficult situations, you are not only avoiding the situation, you are teaching yourself that fear gets to make decisions. That lesson can become expensive psychologically. On the other hand, every time you act despite reasonable fear, you teach yourself something else. I can feel uncertain and still move. That is a much stronger identity. Do not expect fear to disappear after one courageous action. It may return tomorrow. That is normal. The goal is not to defeat fear permanently. The goal is to stop treating its presence as a command. When fear appears, pause. Name it. Assess the actual risk. Choose the smallest useful action. Then take it. Your life will contain many moments when you cannot guarantee the outcome. You will never have perfect confidence before every meaningful decision. If you wait for certainty, you may spend years preparing for a life you never actually enter. So stop asking, how can I become completely fearless? Ask instead, what can I do while I am afraid? That question returns control to you. And once you begin acting despite fear, another challenge appears. Sustained growth requires more than occasional courage. It requires a way to turn everything you have learned into a daily operating system. The final chapters will bring these principles together and show you how to live them consistently rather than simply understand them. Chapter 16. Convert your mindset into a daily operating system. You have spent this journey examining thoughts, rewriting limiting stories, building identity, practicing discipline, protecting attention, handling emotions, recovering from setbacks, shaping your environment, strengthening self-trust, managing uncertainty, improving your inner dialogue, and acting despite fear. But understanding these ideas is not the same as living them. A person can know exactly what they should do and still repeat the same patterns tomorrow. That is why the next step is integration. You need a practical way to carry these principles into ordinary days, including the boring days, stressful days, distracted days, and days when nothing seems to be going according to plan. Think of your mindset as an operating system. An operating system does not perform one impressive task once. It quietly influences how everything else functions. In the same way, your mental habits influence how you begin the morning, respond to difficulty, handle interruptions, speak to yourself, and finish the day. You do not need a complicated system. You need a repeatable one. Start with the daily 4. One thought to practice, one priority to protect, one behavior to complete, and one reflection to review. In the morning, choose one thought that represents the person you are becoming. For example, I can begin before I feel ready. Do not treat it as a slogan. Turn it into an instruction. Then identify your most important priority, not 10 priorities. 1. Ask, if I completed only one meaningful thing today, what would make the day worthwhile? Protect time for it before less important activities consume your attention. Next, choose one behavior that reinforces your identity. It might be 15 minutes of focused work, a short exercise session, reading, practicing a skill, or completing something you have been avoiding. Make it specific. Finally, at night, reflect. Ask what worked, what interrupted you, what you learned, and what you will adjust tomorrow. This creates a simple cycle. Choose, act, observe, adjust, repeat. That cycle is more valuable than a perfect routine you cannot maintain. You should also create different versions of your day. A strong day is when your energy is high and circumstances cooperate. You can challenge yourself more. A normal day is when life is ordinary. You complete your essential commitments without expecting extraordinary performance. A difficult day is when stress, fatigue, responsibilities, or unexpected problems make everything harder. On these days, return to your minimum commitments. This prevents one difficult day from destroying the entire system. For example, your normal reading habit may be 20 pages. On a difficult day, the minimum might be 2 pages. Your normal focused work session may be 45 minutes. On a difficult day, it might be 10. The purpose of the minimum is continuity. You are telling yourself, the circumstances changed, but I did not completely abandon the direction. You should also schedule a weekly mindset review. Set aside 20 minutes. Look at your week without pretending it was better or worse than it actually was. Ask, which thoughts repeatedly influenced my behavior? Which habit became easier? Where did I repeatedly lose control of my attention? Which emotional reaction kept appearing? What promise did I keep? Where did I break trust with myself? What single adjustment would make next week better? Notice the final question, not 10 adjustments. 1. Too many changes at once create mental noise. One meaningful adjustment creates a clear experiment. For example, if your biggest problem was checking your phone during focused work, next week's experiment could be simple: phone outside the workspace during the first focus session. If your problem was inconsistent sleep preparation, your experiment might be preparing tomorrow's essentials before getting into bed. If your problem was emotional reactivity, your experiment could be practicing a deliberate pause before responding to difficult messages. This approach turns personal development into an ongoing process rather than a collection of motivational ideas. There will also be days when the system breaks. That is expected. When it happens, do not spend 3 days designing a new system because you missed one habit. Return to the basic sequence. Choose the next useful action, complete it, review what happened, continue. Your system should help you recover, not make you feel guilty. And remember the central principle of this audiobook: repetition shapes identity. Every morning, you practice your priorities. Every difficult moment, you practice your response. Every habit you repeat strengthens a pattern. Every promise you keep strengthens self-trust. Every distraction you resist strengthens attention. Every mistake you examine strengthens resilience. None of these actions needs to look impressive. That is the point. Real transformation often looks ordinary while it is happening. A person sits down and works. A person closes the distracting app. A person takes a breath before responding. A person keeps a small promise. A person starts again after missing a day. Then they do it tomorrow and the next day. Eventually, the system stops feeling like a project and begins feeling like a way of living. But there is one final principle you need before this journey is complete. You must learn how to continue growing without becoming obsessed with becoming perfect. The goal is not to reach a final version of yourself. The goal is to remain capable of improving the version that exists today. That is the mindset of continuous growth. Chapter 17. Keep growing without becoming a prisoner of perfection. By now you have learned to examine your thoughts, question old beliefs, build a stronger identity, practice discipline, protect your attention, regulate emotions, recover from setbacks, shape your environment, strengthen self-trust, and act despite uncertainty and fear. But there is one final trap that can appear when you become serious about personal growth: the belief that you must improve perfectly. At first, this mindset can look productive. You begin tracking your habits, you organize your mornings, you set standards, you want to become more focused, disciplined, calm, confident, and consistent. You feel excited about becoming a better version of yourself. Then reality happens. You oversleep, you lose focus, you miss a habit, you become impatient, you waste an evening, you react emotionally, you break a promise. Suddenly, the same person who wanted growth begins criticizing themselves for not growing fast enough. This is where self-improvement can quietly become perfectionism. Perfectionism says, if I cannot do it consistently, I am failing. Growth says, I am learning how to become more consistent. That difference matters. A powerful mind does not demand flawless behavior. It develops the ability to notice mistakes, learn from them, make adjustments, and return to the path. Think of learning to ride a bicycle. You do not expect a beginner to remain perfectly balanced from the first second. Wobbling is part of the learning process. Losing balance does not mean the person is incapable of riding. It provides information about what needs to change. Personal growth works the same way. A difficult day can reveal something. A missed habit can reveal that your routine was unrealistic. A distracted afternoon can reveal that your environment needs adjustment. An emotional reaction can reveal a trigger you had not noticed. Repeated procrastination can reveal that the task feels unclear, overwhelming, or uncomfortable. Instead of asking, "What is wrong with me?" ask, "What is this experience showing me?" That question turns self-judgment into investigation. This is the growth without perfection principle. Maintain high standards for your direction while remaining flexible about your process. You can care deeply about discipline without demanding perfect discipline. You can value focus without expecting uninterrupted concentration. You can pursue emotional control without expecting yourself to remain calm in every situation. The goal is progress that can survive real life. Create a simple weekly review called the 3-part progress check. First, identify one thing you handled better than before. Maybe you paused before reacting. Maybe you started a difficult task earlier. Maybe you kept a small promise. Maybe you recovered from a setback faster. Second, identify one pattern that still needs attention. Do not list everything. Choose one. Third, decide on one experiment for the coming week. For example, if distraction remains a problem, your experiment might be leaving your phone outside the room during your first focused work session. If you repeatedly postpone difficult tasks, your experiment might be beginning with only 10 minutes. If emotional reactions are causing problems, your experiment might be practicing the pause and name technique once each day. One problem, one experiment, 1 week. This keeps growth practical. You also need to stop measuring yourself only by visible achievements. Some of the most important improvements happen internally before they become obvious externally. Perhaps you recover from criticism faster. Perhaps you no longer need immediate approval. Perhaps you recognize negative self-talk before believing it. Perhaps you notice an impulse and choose not to obey it. Perhaps you are becoming more comfortable saying, "I do not know." These are signs of psychological growth. They may not impress anyone else. They do not need to. Your goal is not to perform personal development for an audience. Your goal is to become more capable of directing yourself. There is another important lesson. Do not turn your identity into a rigid description. You are not required to say, "I am disciplined forever." Instead, think, "I am someone who practices discipline." That wording leaves room for reality. You will have strong days and weak days. You will sometimes act exactly as you intended, and sometimes wonder why you repeated an old pattern. The difference is that you now know what to do next. Notice, pause, evaluate, adjust, continue. This is much more powerful than pretending you will never struggle again. You should also make room for rest. Growth does not require constant effort. Your mind needs quiet. Your attention needs recovery. Your body needs rest. Your life needs moments that are not being measured, optimized, or turned into lessons. You are not a machine designed to produce improvement every hour. Sometimes sitting quietly, walking without your phone, enjoying a conversation, laughing with someone, or simply doing nothing productive is part of maintaining a healthy mind. Do not confuse constant pressure with commitment. Real discipline includes knowing when to push and when to recover. As you continue, remember the central lesson of this audiobook. Repetition shapes identity. You do not become stronger because you had one extraordinary day. You become stronger because you repeatedly return to useful behaviors. You think more deliberately. You choose more consciously. You practice patience. You protect your attention. You keep reasonable promises. You recover after mistakes. You begin again, and then you repeat the process. Eventually, these repetitions become evidence. The evidence becomes self-trust. Self-trust strengthens identity. Identity influences behavior, and behavior creates another round of evidence. This is the cycle you are building. So stop waiting for the day when you finally become perfect. That day does not need to arrive. Instead, build something more realistic, a mind that knows how to continue. When you fail, return. When you drift, refocus. When you become discouraged, slow down without surrendering. When you discover a weakness, train it. When you improve, appreciate it without becoming complacent. And when tomorrow arrives, practice again. Your goal is not to become a finished person. Your goal is to become a person who remains willing to grow. That is a far more durable form of strength. And now, as this journey approaches its conclusion, everything returns to the beginning. The thoughts you repeatedly rehearse, the choices you repeatedly make, and the identity those repetitions quietly create. Chapter 18. Rehearse the mind you want to live from. Everything you repeatedly think, practice, and reinforce eventually becomes easier to repeat. That has been the central thread of this journey. Your thoughts influence your attention. Your attention influences your choices. Your choices become behaviors. Repeated behaviors strengthen identity, and identity quietly influences what you do next. This does not mean that thinking about something magically makes it happen. It means your repeated mental patterns can shape what you notice, what you expect, what you practice, and how you respond. That distinction matters. You are not trying to control life with positive thoughts. You are training yourself to respond to life with greater awareness and intention. Think about a musician practicing the same difficult passage repeatedly. The first attempts require concentration. Eventually, parts of the movement become more familiar. The musician has not magically become perfect. Their brain and body have simply received enough repetition to make the behavior more accessible. Your mental habits work in a similar way. If you repeatedly rehearse fear, avoidance can become familiar. If you repeatedly rehearse comparison, self-doubt can become familiar. If you repeatedly rehearse patience, reflection can become more accessible. If you repeatedly rehearse disciplined action, beginning can become easier. The question is not whether you are training your mind. You are. The question is, what are you training it to repeat? This is your opportunity to become deliberate. Create a simple mental rehearsal ritual. Each morning, take a few quiet moments and identify one situation you may encounter during the day. Then imagine responding according to the person you want to become. If you expect criticism, imagine listening before defending yourself. If you expect distraction, imagine noticing the impulse and returning to your priority. If you expect difficulty, imagine taking the next step instead of immediately quitting. If you expect an uncomfortable conversation, imagine speaking clearly and respectfully. Do not imagine a perfect day. Imagine yourself responding well to an imperfect one. That distinction makes the practice more realistic. You are not rehearsing a fantasy where everything goes your way. You are rehearsing your behavior when things do not go your way. You can also create a personal operating statement. Keep it short. Something like, I pause before reacting. I finish what I begin whenever reasonably possible. I protect what deserves my attention. I learn from mistakes without turning them into identity. I keep small promises to myself. Choose statements that describe behaviors, not exaggerated claims. Avoid saying, I am unstoppable. Instead say, I continue after setbacks. Avoid, nothing can distract me. Instead say, when I notice distraction, I return to the task. This keeps your mindset connected to reality. Then prove the statement through action. If you say you protect your attention, put the phone away during focused work. If you say you value discipline, complete the small commitment you made. If you say you recover from mistakes, take one corrective action after a setback. Your identity becomes stronger when your behavior gives it evidence. And remember, This entire audiobook has never been about becoming someone else. It has been about becoming more deliberate about who you already have the ability to become. You do not need a dramatic transformation tomorrow morning. You need another useful repetition, another thoughtful decision, another focused session, another moment when you pause instead of reacting, another promise kept, another return after distraction, another attempt after failure. That is how change becomes believable. The title of this audiobook carries an important idea. Money loves a powerful mind. But the deepest lesson is not about money itself. It is about the mind behind your behavior. A powerful mind is not one that constantly thinks about wealth, success, or status. It is one capable of directing attention, managing emotions, practicing discipline, learning from mistakes, and choosing actions deliberately. Your external circumstances may change, your responsibilities may change, your goals may change, but the ability to think clearly, act intentionally, and continue learning remains valuable in every season of life. So take the lessons from these chapters and reduce them to practice. Notice your thoughts. Question the stories that limit you. Choose an identity worth reinforcing. Protect your attention. Regulate your emotions. Keep small promises. Design your environment. Act despite reasonable fear. Learn from setbacks. Rest when necessary. Return when you drift. Then repeat. Do not underestimate ordinary repetition. A single thought may seem insignificant. A single choice may seem small. A single habit may feel almost invisible. But repeated often enough, these small actions begin shaping the person who makes tomorrow's decisions. Your future mind is being trained by today's repetitions, so choose those repetitions carefully. You do not need to control everything. You need to practice controlling what is yours to control, and that is where real mental power begins. Conclusion: become the mind you practice every day. You have reached the end of this journey, but the real work begins when the narration stops. The ideas in these chapters were never meant to remain as inspiring thoughts. They were designed to become behaviors, because understanding what you should do is only the beginning. Transformation happens when understanding becomes repetition. You have seen how thoughts influence attention, how attention influences choices, and how repeated choices gradually shape identity. You have learned to question limiting stories, protect your focus, manage emotional reactions, recover from setbacks, build discipline, design supportive environments, strengthen self-trust, and act even when fear is present. None of these skills requires perfection. They require practice. Your mind is being shaped every day by what you repeatedly tell yourself, what you repeatedly notice, what you repeatedly avoid, and what you repeatedly choose. You are constantly reinforcing something, so become more deliberate about what you reinforce. When you notice a negative thought, you do not have to fight it for hours. Pause and examine it. When distraction appears, you do not need perfect concentration. Return to what matters. When you make a mistake, you do not need to defend it or destroy yourself over it. Learn from it and make the next decision better. When motivation disappears, rely on a smaller commitment. When fear appears, examine the actual risk and take the next reasonable step. When comparison pulls your attention towards someone else's life, return to your own scoreboard. When you break a promise to yourself, repair the pattern instead of creating a permanent identity from one mistake. These small responses may not look extraordinary, but repeated responses create extraordinary differences over time. And remember what "money loves a powerful mind" truly means in the context of this audiobook. It is not a promise that positive thinking will automatically create wealth, nor is it a substitute for practical knowledge or professional financial guidance. The deeper message is psychological. Develop a mind capable of discipline, patience, focus, responsibility, learning, and deliberate action. Do not chase an image of a powerful person. Practice powerful behaviors. Do not wait until you feel transformed. Start acting like the person you are training yourself to become. Your future identity is not created in one dramatic moment. It is assembled quietly through ordinary decisions. The thought you repeat this morning, the distraction you resist this afternoon, the promise you keep tonight, the mistake you choose to learn from tomorrow. That is the real work. So when this audiobook ends, choose one idea, not 21. Put it into practice today, then repeat it tomorrow. Eventually, repetition becomes habit. Habit strengthens identity. Identity influences behavior, and behavior becomes the evidence from which you build your confidence. You are not required to become perfect. You are required to keep becoming more intentional. Think carefully, choose deliberately, act consistently, learn honestly, begin again whenever necessary. Because the mind you repeatedly practice today becomes the mind from which you repeatedly live tomorrow.